Welcome back to the Beyond the Peloton podcast. I'm Spencer Martin, author of the Beyond the Peloton newsletter. As always, I'm here with Andrew Vontz from the Choose the Hard Way podcast and the betterlab.io. We are going to be unpacking Andrew's passion, the gravel racing, unofficial world championships, Unbound Gravel, and the ongoing Critérium du Dauphiné before we get into the Tour de France in a few weeks. But Andrew, do you want to plug anything before we get going?
Yeah, for sure. You can find the Better Lab app for free now in the Apple App Store and also at thebetterlab.io. We help you build mindful, science-backed practices to sleep better and feel good for the things you care about most in life, whether that's showing up as a present parent, excelling on the bus stop ride there in Boulder, like whatever the case may be. Improve your cognitive, physical performance, health and wellness. Sleep is the ultimate performance enhancer. It's free, but it's not easy to get great sleep. We help you make it happen. And also, please check out my podcast, Choose the Hard Way. But more importantly, let's check out Unbound Gravel, Spencer. Boy, I've been excited to talk to you about this topic.
Just bubbling for days since this thing wrapped up.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess I can't really do a rundown of what happened because it's not televised, but Lachlan Morton won, Chad Haga second, like a two-rider mini breakaway, I guess you'd call it. Shootout at the end, and then Tobias Kongstad is third, Pietro Havik is fourth, Matteo DeMarchi fifth, Nordal Svensson is sixth, Greg Van Avermaet seventh. I mean, and I guess it just shows you the amount of like raw cycling talent that is just existing out there that's not breaking through to the highest levels for whatever reason, but can excel in this kind of absurd, ridiculous race that I can't believe anyone does because it's so unbelievably hard.
Yeah, and preceding Unbound, of course, we now know that there was the Lawrence Tendam, Thomas Dekker, Zoolander gas station scene unfolding in a Mexican restaurant parking lot somewhere in rural Oklahoma. The more I read about this, Spencer, it sounds like Thomas Dekker may have been fully nude for some period of time standing in a parking lot. That's kind of what I'm picking up reading between the lines.
It's funny you say that because I think in Phil Guyman's book, one of the I think it's the book Draft Animals, one of the running themes of that book is Thomas Dekker being nude for like long stretches of the book. So yeah, there is a source that would back that up. It also, to me, read like a Mad Libs of just Midwest life, where it was like we tried to go to the grocery store, but it was destroyed by a tornado. So we decided to eat at a Mexican restaurant, and we poured water on ourselves, and someone didn't like it.
Yeah. The only thing that was missing from that, based on my experience growing up riding in the Midwest, which, as we've discussed before, we've had some parallel experiences here. You know, if you're in a rural area, the only thing that I think is missing, no one threw a Slurpee at them. No one threw like a 32-ounce big gulp in their face before calling the cops. So, right? I feel like that's like the first thing is somebody's got to.
That's the baptism.
Yeah. It's usually like three people in the front of a pickup with their seatbelts off. They throw like a large drink in your face, and then something happens after that.
Yes, and in the undercurrent of all this is fear of homosexuality. Like at first I thought, I read that they were arrested for gay behavior, but I believe it was maybe just indecent exposure. I would say in a time when freedom is so hotly debated and prized by many of the country that maybe we should just let a man be naked in a parking lot and dump water on himself. But who am I to make that decision? But yeah, they were, someone thought they might be gay. They were arrested for indecent exposure and then spent the night in jail. Is that right? That cannot be like the ideal prep for gravel race.
Yeah, I have a screen. They, I don't speak the right language to be able to listen to Lawrence Tendam's podcast and understand it. But the video from the podcast, they did have images of their mugshots. So they were. That
is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like the plot of Hot Tub Time Machine or something. You know, I like soon to be a major motion picture is kind of what I picked up. And the other thing that surprised me about all of this, like, understandably, people are outraged, and there's been a big discussion about the homophobia that these two straight guys encountered while changing in a parking lot. I think that's a worthy discussion. It's one we should have. Also, in all these cycling outlets that are covering this, though, no one's talking about like the large scale homophobia that exists in professional bike racing, in which I'm not aware of there ever having been an out male world tour rider.
I guess while they're competing.
Yeah. Like
I don't think I can think of a single one. I mean, I guess that kind of tracks the unfortunate thing. Well, we are getting way off topic here. It's like you saw it in like the NFL, but then I definitely feel like it hurts your career because you hear about someone coming out and then it feels like they're out of the league in a year or two. It's not, I would not say it's accepted at any level of professional sports.
Which it in itself is unacceptable. Like that's not okay. That's not okay. And anyway, so to me, this incident was an interesting microcosm of much larger things going on in the sport. It was an antecedent to then what happened at Unbound itself. And, you know, Ten Dam, like a high level world tour talent, we're not going to only talk about Lawrence Ten Dam. We're going to get into other stuff such as Brian, the moto driver for the guy holding an iPhone, who had to give it throttle repeatedly in those final kilometers so that they would get out of the way of Lachlan and Chad, an accomplished pianist, if you're not aware, by the way. But yeah, so Lawrence Ten Dam, Thomas Dekker spend the night in jail. I went and dug in the results. Thomas Dekker, if you have been following his trajectory, he's done a couple of these YouTube series for sponsors and for Live Slow, Ride Fast, Lawrence Ten Dam's production company and brand, where he trains. It seems like day to day, maybe he's not living a world tour lifestyle. Like Lawrence Ten Dam actually is still training at a world tour level. So Thomas Dekker comes off the bench occasionally, trains up for an event. You know, he was an incredibly talented rider, had a lot of problems with drugs, alcohol, and doping products in his day. Nonetheless, like extremely genetically gifted. So Lawrence Ten Dam has been taking gravel seriously for 5+ years now, maybe longer, since he left the world tour. Thomas Dekker comes off the bench and totally smokes Lawrence Ten Dam, places significantly higher than him in the results, which again maybe speaks to his talent. And I have to think that going to jail before the event may have had some impact on their results, but a lot of stuff going on before.
He did only finish 13 seconds in front of him.
Significantly faster.
If that was a 100-meter dash, oh my God, it'd be a rout. Yeah, I mean, Ten Dam's actually good at this race. He's almost won it
he's
times.
Great at this race. Yeah,
I guess for me, the whole other than bringing up, I mean, it can kind of be scary to get in some of these small towns and like 3 guys in a pickup don't like you. They call the cops and the cops come and they're like, "Hey, these guys said you're gay. Is that true?" And it's like you kind of feel uncomfortable and exposed if that happens to you. But it kind of brings to light to me as Unbound gets bigger and bigger and bigger and is like the center of the cycling world, at least in North America for the year, the community around it is still there. It's not cycling is not life, I would say, in that part of the country. And there's a bit of like, I almost not nimbism, but hatred for cycling, you know, from the area. Like look at Steamboat Gravel. It's almost getting pushed out of Steamboat because the locals don't like people riding bikes on their land. You know, it feels like this is a fundamental problem with US cycling that happens over and over and over again. You'll have these great events not embraced by the community for various cultural reasons, and then it just gets ejected eventually. So something to flag with Unbound. Like you think of it as a big success, but it is just not. There are pockets of the community in which it races through. And I know the event happened in Oklahoma, the Ten Dam Dekker event, but I'm like combining Oklahoma, Eastern Kansas into a single region for this argument.
Both hit by tornadoes frequently.
Just all the time. Oh my God. I spent my whole childhood in a basement.
Yeah, it's been a bad year for tornadoes. Anyhow, so we had that. We had Ivar Slick running into the delivery vehicle 45 minutes outside of Bentonville, which we covered. I think that threw off the races of a couple of people in advance of the race itself. Getting to the race, so Lachlan and Chad get in this breakaway. Lachlan attacked a couple of times before he finally snapped the rubber band and got separation. As I've reflected on this race, I mean, I think one of the questions here is going to be, as previously discussed on 24, we've had this increase in volume to these just bananas levels leading up to this event, where many of the lifetime Grand Prix riders are now putting in multiple 40-hour weeks in advance of the event. It does kind of seem like maybe that's what you have to do to be competitive. On the other hand, Chad Haga shared he was doing 18 to 20-hour weeks, not 40-hour weeks. When I read that in an interview, I think Escape Collective did that interview. It was a good piece. It's good to see some reporting. I mean, my thought was that seems a bit disingenuous to me, because a guy like Chad Haga or even Lachlan spent a lot of time in the World Tour. These guys have bases that these domestic riders are never going to be able to touch. They can put in a lot of 40-hour weeks over the next couple of years. But if you're coming off a World Tour level base, I think you can probably get by on 18 to 20-hour weeks. You know, to provide a counterexample to my point here, though, I'm wondering, is Tour Divide going to be the new prep for Unbound, right? Because like last year.
For anyone who doesn't know what this is, it's potentially I would say maybe the hardest bike event in the world, right? It's unbelievable. You ride from basically Mexico to, is it the Alaskan border or Canadian border through the Rockies?
Other direction. You go from Banff, the border of Banff, Canada, and the United States to Mexico.
All off-road, right?
Yeah, all off-road. And I mean, I suppose you could say that maybe Lael Wilcox, the ultra endurance rider, maybe she's bound to win Unbound 2025, because she's now attempting to set the around the world cycling record, 18,000 plus miles. That's underway right now. The ultimate FKT, try to go out and replicate that in your neighborhood to get a little bit of fame. But yeah, Lachlan, you know, he set the Tour Divide, unofficial Tour Divide record last year. And this year we see him win at Unbound. I think something people don't understand, or that they misperceive about Lachlan, is I think that a lot of people think of him as like a laid back, like soul rider, because he's done things like he did the Untour or whatever they called it, where he rode the entire distance of the Tour de France and spent a lot of time in Tivas and whatever. But this guy is a killer. Like, he wanted to win this race. And I think he did very serious prep for this event. I think it actually, I got the sense watching some of the films about the Grand Prix last year, including one that Lachlan's brother Gus made about him racing Leadville 23, which I got the sense Lachlan really, really wanted to win. I mean, the guy's been doing pretty serious training the last 2 years, in addition to setting the Tour Divide FKT. And he's an animal. Like, the guy has a world-class engine, and he demonstrated it at Unbound.
Yeah, I mean, just to put in perspective Lachlan's talent, he was on Garmin Sharp as a really young rider, and then like self-demoted to Jelly Belly, which is unheard of. It's like no one in their right mind would do that. He wins Tour of Utah, which was a big race at the time, on Jelly Belly. It's really hard to do. And then he goes back to the World Tour, and then he's employed by the team he left. He's on EF by 2019. And like, he voluntarily left the team basically in 2014. And then like, that's like an around the world journey. It's almost impossible. It's a one-way valve. Like, once you leave the World Tour, you don't come back to the World Tour. And he did it. It's so hard to do. I mean, I see him training around where I live in Boulder, and you know, he's so talented on the bike. Like, he looks so fluid. You're just like, I'm just going to go home. Like, I shouldn't even be on a bike. Like, I don't deserve to be riding the same machine this man does. Unbelievably talented. I mean, same thing with Chad Haga. I feel like the narrative, it's been in, I was in the Instagram live for the last hour of Unbound, and I almost was losing my mind because I couldn't tell if it was a bit or not. Be like, who's Chad Haga? It's like, this man's won his Euro stage. Right. So show some respect for him. He's incredibly good, like incredibly talented cyclist. I mean, I guess that's my takeaway. Boring takeaway. Two incredibly talented riders go 1-2 at the hardest race in the United States. I am impressed that, you know, Lachlan has a lot of, he's done as you say, a killer on the bike, but I also think it's underestimated how savvy he is off the bike, because you think of him as like, he's a goofball who like shits in fields in France when he's doing the Untour, but he's built like an apparatus around him that functions just to document and allow him to go do these big events and do, like, you know, what did he race? It was like Cornwall, the tip of Cornwall to Land's End. up at John O'Groats. I think it's Land's End and Cornwall, John O'Groats in Scotland, like a really hard race, basically the entire length of the UK. But Haga was on Human Powered Health last year after getting flicked from the World Tour in 2021. You'd think a guy like that would be losing motivation. His team folds. He doesn't have a contract for 2024, but the focus it takes to just be like, okay, that happened. Now I'm just going to be one of the world's best gravel riders. Like that's actually hard for me to wrap my head around. And he got third at the Traca. This is just turning, I hate gravel racing. This is turning into a gravel racing podcast. I can't believe it. But he got third at the Traca 360, which is a crazy race, 360 kilometers. Like that's not easy. And then to get second here, I was really blown away by how he could just keep that motivation. But then the most boring thing is if you're a gravel racer, like an aspiring gravel racer, let's say Dylan Johnson, who had a great race in 10th. He's just like, well, now the most talented riders in the world are winning this race. Is that discouraging or is that cool for the event?
Yeah, I'm not. I think that it's awesome for the event. I think it validates the event. I also think we're going to see bigger and bigger names coming over. And even I think there's probably I bet a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about Matej Mohoric. It also was a bit unclear what exactly happened there, unless you were following the race incredibly carefully, like I was, and looking at all of the different Instagram handles. But I mean, this is one of the areas of opportunity and one of the massive problems that these events have. That I do think that there is unmet demand to actually see what's going on during the race. And Spencer, you and I were both in the live feed from Flat Brim Bobby on the back of a motorcycle holding a shaky iPhone for the last hour. I mean, Chris Blevins was in there, who's going to be on an upcoming episode of Choose the Hard Way, by the way. I saw a lot of American World Tour riders in there cheering on their teammates. I think Nielsen Palace was in there.
Jorgensen.
Yeah,
we've been saying his name wrong for like 5 months. Jorgensen apparently is what it is.
Yeah. So all these people are in there. They're actually interested in watching this thing. And at the same time, I was reflecting back on, I love cyclocross, even though it's a completely dead sport in the United States now. And I remember watching CX Nats maybe 2006, 2007 when Trebon was the big name, and watching the live feed on YouTube with the fixed camcorders that USAC uses. And, there would be like 2,000 people on there, which kind of spoke to maybe the level of demand to see content from the event. There were 7,000-ish people at the peak and the finale of the Unbound live stream. And then it cut out right before all of the serious action happened. It was
we saw none of the final. Yeah. And you could, the frustrating thing is you could see a helicopter filming it all, right? From the moto we were watching from, you could see the helicopter filming it. They don't do it live. They film it, but they don't do it live. And I understand why they do it, because live race production is crushingly expensive. It kills races. That's why a lot of these races go under. They film it locally and then cut it up and release it. I think they just released their 1 hour Unbound. It's a good idea. Like, these are good products they're doing. It does kind of make me wonder, eventually, do they just have to do it? They have to bite the bullet. It's like, what if Ironman World Champs wasn't broadcast live? It'd be a little funny. You'd think maybe it would never have reached the level that it has without a live broadcast. At the same time, you got to be careful with the money. They're in a place that doesn't have, I think it's called CPAC technology. That's what they used at Road National Championships, where you basically do a live broadcast using cell coverage. And that's why half the course wasn't available at Nats. But with Starlink, you kind of wonder now, could you just have Starlink mounted on a moto and you're streaming it using your Starlink connection instead of, I won't even attempt to get into how real live race broadcasts work, but it involves satellites and planes flying and then helicopters beaming up to the planes. It's extremely complicated. But I kind of wonder if Starlink could solve a lot of these problems and make it much cheaper.
Yeah, I've been talking to my friend Eric Matthews, who is a high-level producer and documentary filmmaker, and he has a lot of ideas about how you could actually do this, probably with the same budget, and produce a high-quality product. So maybe we'll talk to him in a future episode. But yeah, I think there is a way to do this. And I mean, the way they're doing it right now, they're delivering these hour-long recaps, I guess, following the event. They're higher quality. But the magic of sports is seeing it live. No recap is going to recapture the audience and like the interest. Like the race is over, the outcome. And personally, I don't know how many interviews I need to see with. I wanted to see the event. I don't necessarily want to see talking heads in a dark studio with large hats covering their ears talking about what happened. Another thing that I wanted to point out here, Spencer, as we were watching the finale of the race, one thing that jumped out at me, there was Brian, who was driving the motorcycle, the source of the famous phrase, "Brian, give it some throttle." All right, so we had Brian on the moto with the person with an iPhone on very close to the riders for an extremely long portion of the race. And then there also is a side-by-side out there, which is an ATV. It's not the size of a car, but it's big enough. I kept thinking strategically, it's so high risk to be in that group, like Mohoric experience, where, you're riding blind. He ended up running into a big rock and broke his rim because he just didn't see it coming. This happens all the time in gravel. Whereas people, you do have to create separations. So you're taking a risk on the energy expenditure there. But in these events, because Unbound is filming them, if you're able to get out front, you create separation, you then pretty much have two vehicles in close proximity to your breakaway. It's very windy. And I have to think that you're getting some kind of shelter from the wind because of the way they're filming the race. Like they're really small roads. The cars and the side-by-side and the motorcycle can't be that far away from you. It's not like a road race. And, I haven't seen helicopter footage of this yet. I could be not have the facts straight here, but that is how it appeared for pretty big stretches of the coverage to me.
I thought the same thing. It looked like they're getting a fabulous draft from.
Yeah, that's a less politic way of saying it. Yeah.
But I kind of like it, it adds a level of nuance to what could just be a boring, like triathlon-esque effort of just like, put out power for 9 hours and whoever can do most wins. Or did you see this? Lachlan broke away, went the wrong way, had to go back on course, got caught by the Peloton. And it probably helped him because then he didn't burn his matches too early. He's back in the Peloton and then he breaks away later again at the right time with the right guy and wins the race. That wrong turn probably saved his race. But it's, I don't know, the whole thing. And I guess we need a live broadcast because it is hard to get a feel for. It doesn't feel like the Peloton has any go because there's not really teams, right? Teams are against the spirit of gravel. No one has, I guess Mate Mohoric had technically teammates there. So maybe if he's in that group, he puts his teammates on the front. But the race seems so hard and attritional. There might not be. It's different from road racing where you can just say, all right, guys, get on the front, close it down, and I'm going to win. Like, there is a big advantage to being out front because the Peloton, you might be with a bunch of guys that you're racing against. You can't come to an agreement. The breakaway rides away. I thought that was the most interesting part is the do I go off the front and try to get draft from this ATV, and this moto, or do I sit in and risk it? Clearly the right decision to roll the dice there. What did you think about Greg Van Avermaet getting 7th? To me, I did not see that coming. Like the man must be a psychopath to just retire from such an illustrious road racing career. I'm sure having made a ton of money, and then just he was not here waving at the flowers. Like this was not a Peter Sagan. I'm going to coast through the 100 and have a good time. Like that must have been miserable. Like the guy just loves suffering apparently.
Yeah, he's got that Valverde bug, and I believe Van Avermaet is the part of. Gravel doesn't necessarily have teams. It has small groups of people, and then they're a part of organizations or brands that have no vowels. So I know Van Avermaet is part of something. I'd like to buy you a vowel. I don't remember what his thing is called. And yes, so yeah, I think he wanted it really bad. I think he took it quite seriously. This was going to be his next gold medal moment to kind of cement his position in the gravel scene. I'm really curious to see what he does at Gravel Worlds this year. He is only 39, 1 year older than Geraint Thomas and Cav, so like, who knows? Like the guy could have another rainbow jersey in front of him. And, Spencer, I also wanted to ask you, again, I know that you went pretty deep into this, maybe deeper than you're comfortable talking about here on air. I've now spent hours watching point of view footage from inside the elite men's pack and the elite women's as well. This is a freaking hairy race. I mean, you're slipping and sliding on large rocks. You don't know what you're going to hit. And they stayed like quite tight. I've talked to a lot of gravel pros, including Ian Boswell, Keegan, others I've had on Choose the Hard Way. And a lot of them say, hey, I try to leave some space because you don't really know what's coming up. And also, I don't want to do what I had to do in Boswell's case in the World Tour. He rung his bell too many times, right? He doesn't want to have that happen again. But this year, man, they were a super tight peloton. And then reading some of the yipping and yapping on social media, a lot of talk about the quote unquote negative racing, which in my view, what happened is a bike race happened and people were right. And people were actually strategic. You didn't just have this like fantasy group ride where people were taking pulls and then the same thing eventually happens once you hit the chute or whatever for the sprint. But this year it felt to me like, okay, we have a real bike race happening here. How did it feel to you?
Yeah, it feels like logic is seeping into what was illogical because as you say that, I think like back in the Boswell and Tendam years, this was what now a few years ago at this point, there was like some sort of weird unspoken thing where you're not supposed to hold back. You're just supposed to ride hard and rotate through as hard as you can. And then you see who can win at the end. That's obviously not how bike racing works. And yeah, I was watching the Peloton thinking, this looks a lot like a bike race because if I was doing a 9+ hour race, I would be saving as much energy as I possibly could and only break away if I knew it was potentially successful, like Haga and Morton did. Sorry, guys, this is gravel racing's turning into bike racing. And I guess it's just as the stakes get bigger, people are going to race more and more conservatively. It's also, here's my next question. I guess so we can land this plane before we get into the Dauphiné. This is a hard race, like 9-10 hours. Like just to give you a point of reference, BWR California is 5 hours. So it's almost twice as long. As we saw with Dylan Johnson had a post-race interview and he kind of wrote about it, talked about it on his own channels. He really focused, like it was a math problem to him. The fueling, basically take as many carbs as you can without pooping yourself, have as much water as you can get your hand on, if not to drink, just to dump on you. Stay as cool as you can. It keeps your power from dipping off in the second half of the race. Anyone who's raced in the southern half of the Midwest knows it's just staying cool is like half the battle with putting out power. I guess, is this turning into like, will this just become so scientific that unless you're completely dialed in, you're not even going to be able to compete? If we go down the results sheet, I guarantee you there's guys who thought, like Daniel Loss, like, I'm good. I can show up. I can do this. Or Griffin Easter, Tobin or Ordenblad. These are good racers. Rob Britton. But if you're not completely obsessed with the science of it, you just don't stand a chance because it's so long. And then, Alexei Vermeulen, oh, my brother's wedding was this week. Like, can I see I want to see those emails. Let's subpoena the emails. Is this like, will people start dodging it? Or Matej Mohoric, did he hit a rock? Or did he just ride 100 miles and say, that's a pretty good training day, I'm going to bag it, ride? And I'm not accusing him of anything, but I'm just, if I was designing the perfect training day for him, I got 6 hours of good riding in. Let me get back to Emporia, get on that PJ, get back to Nice. That's probably what I would recommend for him. So I kind of wonder, will the move be to actually skip Unbound because it is such a hard race physically, but also financially and planning bandwidth wise, that people will dodge it?
Yeah. If you want to have a nightmare tonight, watch the Ted King video about what he had to pack to go to Unbound this year. His wife also did the race, but man, just like what you have to bring to the race, it's a lot worse than a cyclocross race. And I mean, a cyclocross race it's only an hour, but I mean, it's bananas. I mean, that coupled with the whole quote unquote F1 pit stops, they're like, this is actually a new genre of Instagram reels and YouTube shorts where amateurs and pros have people in their pit wearing a chest mounted GoPro showing the speed of their how fast they're getting a rider in and out of the pit. So like you have to have all your gear. You have to have, if you're at a pro level, you really need a mechanic. You need multiple wheel sets to have at each of the different checkpoints. You need multiple tires. You need a replacement for everything. It's a lot. So I think,
and that's all coming out of your own pocket.
Yeah, that's all coming out of your own pocket. Yeah. I mean, and to that point, the thing that I wonder about Chad Haga is not, does he have the talent to, I don't know, come back and win Unbound or maybe go win some other big gravel event? It's like, can this guy, like, can he get it together and start going super deep in like the Dylan Johnson game and like making some silly videos about himself? Dylan Johnson's videos are not silly, but there's a lot of content out there, and that's basically what you have to do now. Like, Chad Haga's a world-class talent, and now he's going to need to become a world-class creator if he wants to have a sustained and come to go and do this stuff. And notably, both Chad and Lachlan were on fairly normal setups, really, with exposed, I don't know if you noticed this, they did have exposed cables on those handlebars. They were not running hidden cable setups. So if you were to listen to some internet pundits, I don't even know how they finished this bike race.
How are they not going backwards?
Yeah.
Negative 200 miles. I guess that is a testament to, there still is the divide between, like the attention to detail specialists like Dylan Johnson, and then just World Tour talents. You said something after the race in a private conversation, so apologies for bringing this up. You said this is a classics level result. I guess my only pushback on that is I don't recall Lachlan Morton and Chad Haga competing for too many classic races.
Well, this is the paradox of this whole journey that gravel has taken, and I don't know if we can even say his name anymore, but Colin Strickland, when he won Unbound, and Spencer, you and I have talked about this dozens of times. Colin Strickland won Unbound. EF offered him a contract to go race the classics. Basically, they thought like, hey, if this guy can do this, maybe he can, support our classics team, I think was the thinking. Also, before he was completely canceled for everything that happened, he had like a large social media presence and was a creator-esque type of person. So perhaps that's why they wanted him on the team. But that used to be the thinking, like, hey, if you can win a 204, 205 mile race, maybe you have what it takes to go do well in Europe. And now we have people coming back from the World Tour and winning this thing. So the question is, although he hasn't raced classics in the past, does JV get on his personal plane, fly it to Emporia after the finish of Unbound to tell Lachlan, hey, Lachlan, you're going back to the classics team?
I think they're slightly different efforts. And I think Lachlan, I mean, the races are so dang long, like a 10-hour race. It's quite specific, but they should just keep Lachlan where he is because he's delivering lots of value for that team. Whatever they're paying him, it's not enough. It's funny you mentioned Colin Strickland. I wanted to talk about that. Just going back to the 2019 race, top 20 of that race, the only non-North American is Lachlan Morton in fourth. Flash forward to 2024. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 American riders in the top 20 and a handful of Canadians, perhaps, or no Canadians. So just 6 North Americans. I mean, that shows you just how much the level has risen as this has gotten more international. I'm curious to see what happens. If there's more, like this guy, Tobias Kongstad, let's say he finishes third. What if he wins? Like, what happens to him? He had a cup of coffee on Drone Hopper, or no, that's someone else. That is DeMarchi in fifth. He was on Drone Hopper in 2016. Stopped racing pro in 2017, and then what's been going on since then? Like, how is he so good? Is he just become a gravel specialist? Would he go back to the World Tour if he won that race, or is this just like an entirely different thing now? And if you can do well in gravel, you stay in gravel. I don't know. I have many conflicting feelings about it. I actually kind of don't want to like Unbound, but I found myself really wishing that they had the live broadcast because I wanted to watch it. It is quite interesting, the challenges of it. I guess another thing too is since it's become professionalized, let's say post 2017, no repeat winners, right? And that kind of brings up my question is, this is just so hard, it fries you out. Like, do you remember ultra running was popular? Like, was that guy Anton Krpichka? Right. But the thing of ultra running is, I think what hurts its appeal a little bit is it's so hard. It fries you out after like 24 months. So you always have new winners. It's hard to build personalities. Now, Lachlan's obviously been around for a long time, but Lachlan's a freak. No one should ever try to do what Lachlan does. I kind of I'm curious to see if we will see like a hierarchy, or if like is Keegan Swenson, is he just, hesitate to use the word done, but is his reign at the top over, and you'll just see more new people cycle in?
Yeah, Keegan was a monster energy short of a victory here in 2024. I'm curious to see what happens for the remainder of the season. Keegan's still a pick of mine to be Gravel World Champion this year. He did get fifth last year at the Gravel World Championships in a race that I don't think particularly suited him. He had a bad start, and I think he's going to be extremely motivated to take that victory. So that's a prediction. That's my hot take for the day. Payson McElvain with one of the rides of his life here at Unbound as well, in 8th place, right behind the notorious GVA. But I do think if you're going to be great at something, and if you could be great at any of a variety of cycling disciplines, maybe don't be great at the race that takes 9+ hours, right? I'm not sure that's the one you want to be great at. I think it takes a real toll on your body. Just take a look. I don't remember if we were sharing the post about Dave Scott of the famous Mark Allen Dave Scott battles at Ironman Kona. But one of the things that's happened with a lot of triathletes from the early days of triathlon, they were just doing massive, what I would call like Soviet level volume. The Eastern Bloc riders and also power lifters, Olympic lifters, were infamous for just an extremely, extremely high volume of training. And what they would do in the Eastern Bloc, there were, a lot of things that were not legal going on. But in addition to that, that system selected for a very limited number of people who just could bear with a volume of training that would crush almost everyone. So a lot of that was going on from a training volume point of view in the early days of triathlon. It gave you some talents like Mark Allen, Kenny Souza, Dave Scott, and others. And we're now seeing that the impact of that on your long-term health is not a great one. And going out and racing for 10 hours at a time and doing the volume necessary to do that, we don't have a lot of proof of what I'm about to say. My hypothesis would be that over time, it's not going to be an extremely healthy thing for people to do.
I agree. Yeah. It does not seem healthy at all. I do kind of wonder though, with Keegan, you mentioned World Championships. I don't know. This is not that he wasn't trying to do well. Just I'm going to put less resources into this super resource intensive race and focus on other things further down the line.
I haven't seen a lot from him, and if Unbound has put out, or Lifetime has put out the documentary about Unbound, I haven't watched the full recap yet. I did get the sense from bits and bobs I saw here and there, he was heavily marked and he couldn't do anything basically. So that's one of the things that we see happen in the World Tour, where it's like, hey, if you're Remco or Matthew Van Der Poel, and you can't just ride off the front anymore once you do it a couple of times. So you're a heavily marked rider, and then you have to race in a completely different way, which is, it becomes a highly strategic thing. And I suppose that's part of why there was some talk of quote unquote negative racing / it's just bike racing. It's what happens.
Yes. And then before we go to the Dauphiné for 4 minutes of road racing talk, help me understand this Matej Mohoric situation. So he's training for the Tour, as Benji said last week, probably coming off an altitude block. Flies out on Thursday. Probably, I don't know where he lives. I assume Monaco, just for the tax benefits. Let's say he's flying from Nice, Monaco, Slovenia, one of those places. Not easy. You get there Thursday, multiple connecting flights. And then you do the race, you hit a rock, you fly back, I guess, presumably Sunday morning. That's a big trip. Do you and I know there was a lot of talk of there's no prize money at Unbound. There is prize money for the Lifetime Grand Prix. Lifetime owns Unbound. We could debate this all day. I think if everyone's showing up, why do prize money? I do think it leaves them vulnerable. Like, what if there was the Beyond the Peloton Runbound the same weekend, and we were paying out like $6 million for first place. Like we would, boom, right there, we would like take the cream of the crop away from Unbound. It probably leaves them in a little bit of a vulnerable position. But so he comes out, does the race. Did he get paid by Unbound? I'm having a hard time squaring this. Like, that's a big energy expenditure from a travel perspective. He did not seem too bummed about flatting out of the race, breaking his rib. Or was Merida just like, hey, if we're going to sponsor your team for 4 or 5 million euros a year, you got to throw us this bone, and we want Mate to be there. And that was part of the deal. I can't quite figure out if he got additional cash or if that was just baked into the sponsorship deal. But then even, why does Merida care about Unbound? Because they don't even sell bikes in the U.S.
That was going to be, you just stole my thunder. I was going to ask, can I even buy a Merida bike? I mean, I know I can't buy a Dare bike, which if you're on UnoX staff, you can send me one. I think those bikes are extremely cool.
Everything about that team is awesome.
Yeah, I feel like
maybe
it's
that's
like
a fossil fuel company, but pretend
I don't know. Yeah, my projection is like I'm an UnoX person. I feel like I'm you know what I mean? Like, I'm your size. I like your bikes. They're cool. I feel like, I could, like, let's get in a pace line together.
Guy. I worked at KPMG. But do you know, I'm going to blow your mind even more. Do you know Merida owns Specialized, like 51% of Specialized?
Whoa.
And then part of the deal with that was they couldn't sell in the U.S. market. So that's why you can't buy them here. Biggest bike brand in the world, I believe, or maybe second behind Giant.
Very interesting. And Rob Roskop, who started Santa Cruz Bikes, just joined the Specialized Advisory Board this week, which was interesting news to me. He left Santa Cruz a couple of years ago, and now he's in the mix over there at Specialized. Spencer, I did pull up the Lifetime Grand Prix prize list, and I also want to address your comments about Mohoric's travel. So, showing up 2 days before a race with international travel, not real optimal prep. I will say the footage I've seen from inside of the race, Joe Gettle, who's, I don't know if he's actually in the Lifetime Grand Prix, but he's doing all these races. Great guy, scrappy, out there, true privateer. I've had him on Choose the Hard Way. He's got really fantastic footage from a lot of these races, and his footage from inside Unbound, if you want to see world tour level bike handling and positioning relative to everyone else, I mean, watch how Mohoric uses his body to get around in the group. There's a lot of contact, and he's a very dexterous and agile rider. So I recommend checking that out. Looking at the prize money, so there is a $300,000 purse. It's split equally between men and women.
This is for the Lifetime Grand Prix, right?
Yes, this is for the overall. There's zero prize money at Unbound. But for the overall Grand Prix, keeping in mind you have to self-fund, get out to all these races in different places.
Selected.
Yeah. And you're training 40 hours a week. So you're not working at Sparrow on the side. First place, $30,000 cash.
Well, Lifetime, they're just barely getting by though, right? What's their turnover of $2.2 billion a year? I mean, these guys, they're just putting food on the table. But I mean, I guess that's the benefit of owning every major race and the major event in the country or in the
completely. I do think though, going back to the why is there no live coverage question, it seems to me at this point, with the amount of money Lifetime is putting into a marketing spend and content production around the event, the delta between what they spend now and the cost it would take to actually get the Starlinks and more vehicles and whatever they need to actually broadcast the race, I just don't feel like it could be that much. And it just seems like it would be a good marketing spend if you actually want to like keep growing this stuff. Because there's a non-zero chance this is the next 24-hour mountain bike racing or what, we've talked about it before, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking, lost in thoughts the other day, thinking, this reminds me a lot of not only cyclocross, but it just name it. It's any of these things, these trends that come around, like Norba, we've talked about a ton, but they just spring up, they're super popular, and then they just go away. It's like puff of smoke, boom. I mean, remember the Tour of California? Like, I remember the Tour of California director saying, we want to be bigger than the Giro d'Italia. And people thought that's realistic. And Peter Sagan never did the Giro before, I believe, 2020, because he was always at the Tour of California, the best rider in the world at the time. So you just have to you do have to be pretty aggressive about cementing yourself, because we've seen so many sub-disciplines rise up, become really popular, and then go away. Like Grand Fondos, calling Grand Fondos. Like, remember when those were a big deal?
Yeah, totally. The thing that sprang to mind for me was just 24-hour solo racing. Outside actually had me write about a racer who sadly has since died, but I think her name was Monica Pua-Sawicki. And she was like one of the biggest 24-hour solo racers in the mid 2000s. There were many others. I think Jeremiah Bishop actually was one of them. He's racing gravel now for Top Peak Ergon, I think, Canyon. So there's some of these riders still around, but things have gone through waves, and there have been some of these extreme endurance aspects of off-road racing that have kind of come and gone. The thing to me that I guess is somewhat parallel to gravel, and I personally find to be quite interesting, there's not a lot of coverage of it, is marathon mountain bike racing. So mountain bike races that are like 4+ hours, like probably in the 4 to 6 hour range. Big in Europe. In the United States, I mean, good luck finding a cross-country race in most regions. But I think that's a pretty interesting discipline that you just don't see that much.
No, I mean, you'd hate to be like in 15 years, be like, yeah, there's this interesting little discipline, gravel. People get together and ride very long times over gravel surfaces. So you're probably right. They need to expand while they can to cement themselves, like Ironman. But I mean, even Ironman they're coming under a lot of competitive pressures. There's like the P100 or whatever. It's just, you can't call yourself an Ironman, but you can just kind of rebrand the same type of race and put a lot of pressure on the incumbent. So I'm curious to see what happens with gravel over the next few years. But to transition out of that into the road racing, Critérium du Dauphiné this week. Whew. I think so there was a time trial on stage 4. Of course, Primož Roglič crashed on stage 3. Derek G wins it. Pretty incredible ride by G, by the way. Holy smokes. People might have forgotten about that guy after the Giro d'Italia last year, but that is a big talent, because not only does he win stage 3, stage 4 time trial, which Remco smokes, beats Josh Charlene, who everyone, I don't know if you caught it, Benji's saying this, but not just Benji. A lot of people are saying this, like penciling him in for the Olympic time trial championships, but it's like, excuse me, have you heard of this man, Remco Evenepoel? He's pretty good at time trials. He absolutely smokes Josh Charlene, takes something like 25 seconds from him on the last 10K, which was uphill, which shows you the dude is flying right now. Primož gets third, 39 seconds back. Derek G, interestingly, gets sixth, minute 24 back. But everyone's saying, oh, Remco in shape for the Tour. He's 33 seconds ahead of Primož in the GC. Matteo Jorgensen, by the way, having a great race in third after that TT. Yesterday gets canceled. We'll talk about that in a second. But then stage 6 today, the really tough summit finish rolls around in the Alps, multiple classified climbs. Remco wilts on the final climb. Primož Roglič, who crashed yesterday, also Remco crashed. A lot of guys crashed. Maybe that had to do with it, but Roglič wins just like looking like the Roglič of old, the Roglič we know. And Remco loses 42 seconds in the race lead. So I would say the crash probably affected him, but Remco Evenepoel's never really done well climbing in the Alps on stages with multiple classified climbs. Tomorrow is even harder. To give you a perspective on how tough these final climbs are, like today's was 10K at around 9% average gradient, which is really steep. And then tomorrow there's something like there's 3 Cat 1 climbs and an HT climb to finish. It is 10K long at around 10% final average gradient. So these are really tough climbs. But stage 5, which I skipped over, there was a massive crash on a wet descent. Race was neutralized. I don't know, Richard Pluga was like, this would never happen in F1. Well, actually, It does happen actually quite a bit in F1. See Monaco last year where they're just slipping and sliding around in the rain. But I don't know, it was a straight descent. I don't, unless you just cancel races in the rain, I don't totally know what there would be to do about that.
Yeah, and I was wondering if there was anything, do we have an olive oil harvesting situation? Is there anything that we don't know yet about this road? I think the answer is we know everything about the road, and it was just a straight road.
Like so wet. Like it's actually hard to, maybe they should have like not done it, because I was actually shocked to see how much water was on the road.
Okay. So they're probably hydroplaning and Spencer and I have talked about this a bit offline, and we've talked about it some on previous episodes. It's not just that bikes are much faster now. We've got riders in this extreme far forward position. If you look at most riders in the World Tour, they have the position that actually Adam Hansen pioneered this 10 years ago. So the saddle's as far forward on the rails as possible. They're running, a 150 plus stem. So a lot of weight is out over the front wheel, which is the least stable part of the bike. And you get going in a straight line, you start hydroplaning, you're not going to have a good day.
No. And I mean, even just me personally, I went from like maybe a more traditional Rembrake bike to a Ventum bike. Thank you, Ventum, for hooking me up with the bike. But it's a bigger bike technically. So I thought, well, the reach is longer, so I'm going to need a shorter stem, minimum the same stem. I get the bike, stem is way too short. And I still can't quite figure out why that is. Good thing I didn't get the integrated handlebar because I could just swap out the stem for a 110 for 120. But I'm definitely more forward on the bike. I actually don't have an explanation for why everything just feels more tilted forward and more aggressive and faster. And I think that's what we saw on stage 5, where everyone is in aggressive position going really fast. I mean, if you see these guys braking, like on the video, there is not much anyone could have done to stop. So maybe they would have been down anyway, even on rem brakes. But yeah, there was nothing to do. They crashed. No one outside of Visma riders got too hurt. So it just like adds to the Visma bad luck. Dylan Van Baarle breaks a bone, maybe a collarbone, and then Steven Kruijswijk is out of the race with a broken bone. Neither will do the Tour. Those are 2 key Tour de France domestiques. Juan Ayuso from UAE, I guess, stayed in the race, but then he withdrew today because of injuries from the crash. Theo Gegenhardt also looked pretty beat up. The Juan Ayuso injury is interesting to me because I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. There's been a lot of talk all week where it's just like Juan Ayuso, second leader for UAE. It's like, what are you talking about? Did you guys not watch the Giro d'Italia? Like, UAE should not have a second leader. Like, maybe they should have, I guess, someone in reserve in case something happens to Tadej. But if Juan Ayuso thinks he's going to the Tour to lead the team, I would assume Tadej Pogačar has news for him. That is not happening.
Yeah, I think Tadej's going to have to invite him over to his chalet to use the sauna that he told Geraint Thomas he could use if he paid 20 euros to have a chat. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. And I know that we're deep on the Dauphiné right now, Spencer, but I do feel it would remiss if I didn't mention, because I know many people listening are wondering, where did Aldo Ilisek finish at Unbound? Well, he finished, Aldo, a legend of criterium racing in the Red Hook fixed gear scene, gave the Unbound elite field a shot this year at age 39. He finished in 116th out of 117 riders in 14 hours and 9 minutes. He did complete, so chapeau. Going back to the Dauphiné, with what we saw from Remco today, which, as you noted, like, we're getting into some extreme, sustained, steep territory on the final climb. What did you make of Remco falling off the pace and then seemingly like kind of pulling it back together and re-accelerating? Like, what was going on? Like, is it a mental thing? Like, what's happening?
Yes. And it's like I served you this question. Yes, I do think it's mental. Because you see him do this all the time on tough climbs where he'll lose the pace. It looks like he's done. And then it's just like, looks like he's in a turbo mode on an e-bike or something 10 minutes later, like flying along. And it's like, well, what happened? Why didn't you just dig deeper to stay in the group? I do think it's a little bit of like a mental panic, like, oh, it's hard right now. And then it's like, oh, I still have something left. But the point of that is, if you can't stay in a front group like that, you can't be a GC contender at Grand Tours. Because even if you put, like, let's say he put out the same amount of power as Primož on that final climb, just hypothetically, he's going slower because for key sections, flatter sections, he's going much harder and going the same speed probably because Primož is staying with people and getting draft. So it's not a good way to ride climbs if you're trying to finish in the fastest possible time, putting out the least amount of power possible. And I mean, I just feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions about Remco, and that will continue to be brushed over because of the crash yesterday. I would assume if he had trouble today, he's going to have even more trouble tomorrow because it's a brutally hard stage and it happens at like 4 a.m. US time. So we probably won't see it. But And then we're going to go, everyone's going to forget about this. We're going to go into the Tour de France and he's going to say he's a contender. But it's like, well, I don't know. I'd say to be a contender at the Tour, you probably need to be able to climb big mountains. It seems to be like a prerequisite.
Yeah, what I saw today suggested to me we're going to see Remco the stage hunter at Tour de France 2024. I think he'll fake go for the GC for about a week, and then he'll either totally blow up or wreck, and then it'll be, okay, Remco's going to try to win a stage. He'll have an excuse for, I mean, he has a baked-in excuse, right? He only had 5 days of competition before the Dauphiné, I think.
Yeah, but and I almost think it seems mental though. And what's weird is after the Vuelta last year where he had that disappointing day in the mountains, Lefebvre came out and said, well, it's not his fault. He's not prepared. But it's like, well, what are you talking about? What were you doing all summer? Weren't you supposed to be preparing for the Vuelta? That was your main goal. So I don't fully understand, because he did physically look good. Like with the 1K to go, he was flying on that climb today. Kind of makes me wonder if it is a physical deficiency, or I don't know, just doesn't have the confidence on some of these longer climbs to go deep to hold the wheel. And he almost rides too even or like too close to power and lets those gaps go out. I don't fully understand it, but I don't know. Do you think him or Primož, do you think they had any differing training after the crash at Basque Country? Or, I mean,
did Remco
I actually, shoulder blade?
All right. So I've got this in my notes. I have some theories about this. I don't think that we're ever going to see Remco win the Tour, and I think that this is the last year that he's going to be able to pretend that that's a possibility. I feel like Roglič, he does crash. I mean, the guy crashes constantly.
A lot.
I mean, he crashes a lot. I'm starting to feel like there's like he's a connoisseur. Like he wants to sample the terroir of every region he rides in. Like, you know what? Like, what's the asphalt like in this part of France? I got to get down there and really experience it.
Embedded in my skin for 2 weeks.
And I just don't think he cares. I think he actually carries with him the disregard for his body that you see among really, really young riders who just haven't wrecked enough to have that appreciation for not wanting to do that. Not that Primož has a bloodlust or, that he actually wants to be hurt. I just think it doesn't impact him that much mentally. And which would make sense. This guy used to go off of a ski jump, right?
Yeah, it's so like people make fun of that fact because it's like been beaten over the head. But I feel like it's so in your face, people forget. It's like, no, like, have you seen a ski jump before? Can you imagine going down that thing? Like, you've got to be a psychopath.
Yeah. So I honestly, I just don't think he's scared. I think he's a pretty fearless rider, and this stuff happens. Who knows what's going on or why exactly it happens constantly. And, it is going to interfere with his ability to succeed. I still definitely see Primož as a very strong contender to win the Tour de France. And will he wreck in the Tour? Yeah, probably. But looking at the stage today and what's just unfolded in the Dauphiné, man, Remco doesn't have the right stuff to do this. Roglič, I believe, still does. His team also looks fantastic. Like riding in support of Roglič, feel really good about it.
Really good. I
really good,
impressed by the team. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Derek G earlier. I don't know what his contract situation is, but I just have this feeling. I just feel that like that Ineos tractor beam is maybe been fired up.
Don't do it, Derek. He's with IPT through 2028. I actually
or is he?
I would think he'd be great on Visma. If I was going to give him unsolicited advice, I'd say go there. And the thing about Remco, people will say, oh, it doesn't matter. He's just finding his legs. He's going to recover, blah, 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 blah. It does matter. It does matter a lot. I went through, it is the last 9 years, the winner of the Tour de France finished top 4 in the GC in a June stage race. Like, it's unheard of that you would not be at the tippy top. And I know he's currently in second, but I think after tomorrow, he'll be quite a bit further down. If he was cracking the day, tomorrow's going to be even tougher. But you can't just go to these June stage races and knock it around a little bit and say, oh, I'm just shaking the legs out. You have to be like not at your very, very best, but at least mentally there to then even compete at the Tour. So like the Dauphiné matters. I know it can be kind of a boring race because it just has this rhythm where it builds into the final weekend, and there's no one on the side of the road, and it doesn't look like anyone lives anywhere near anywhere that these races are happening. But the Dauphiné and the Tour de Suisse and the Tour of Slovenia do matter for the Tour. You have to be really good here if you want to compete for GC at the Tour. Andrew, the only thing I was thinking about this, Primož for the Tour thought, driving around, and I was thinking, well, the only flaw of this is two things have to happen. Primož has to not crash the Tour. So like, what's the percentage there? Let's say it's 50-50. And then Tadej would probably have to crash or just completely capitulate and fall apart in the third week, which has happened. So it's not impossible, but the needle he has to thread is not massive.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to I don't recall which stage it was, but we had that Jonas Pog descent where they both were kind of flying off the road.
Yeah.
You know the one I'm talking about? I feel like Pog, like Roglič, actually is, man, he'll do whatever. And I think he likes the thrill of the fight and he likes going downhill fast and sometimes takes it a bit too far. So I do think it's the kind of situation where Pog could get lured into deep water in a dangerous situation on a descent. That's where I could see something. I mean, I hate to...
Or a sprint finish like Benji mentioned last week. I mean, that actually does freak me out quite a bit. I don't fully understand why Tadej's taking those risks in the sprints.
Yeah, completely. So I think those are scenarios where we could see that happen. And then I want to get into the Visma Tour situation in a moment. Before we do, just to circle back to Remco, something that Geraint Thomas mentioned in his interview with Pog, where Pog just completely owned him and was quite hilarious. Yeah.
Total pro. He's a total pro.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
But they mentioned that Remco until this week has never raced in France. Is that actually true?
Well, if they said it, I'm inclined to believe it.
But I like that just struck me as extremely odd when I heard that.
It might be true. I'm looking up every one of his results in stage races, and there's not a single French one there.
Why might that be? That seems unusual to me.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I saw it's like one of these things when you load up your phone and you just get like radicalized by the things that are served to you. And one was just like Geraint
Apple
Thomas.
News. Yeah.
Geraint Thomas' quote of like, Remco only does races he knows he can win because of pressure in Belgian media. I have no idea if Geraint Thomas even said that, but maybe he is avoiding because these French races are hard. Like think of French races that suit Remco. It'd be like the Dauphiné, the Tour.
Right.
It's actually not that, like he's not going to do Paris-Roubaix. So he probably has been not avoiding them, but not putting them centerpiece of his calendar. Mm. Yeah, I don't know. Just like it will be interesting. And I do think he's an amazing rider, but I think the rubber, I don't want to be overly critical of him, but the rubber is starting to hit the road on his extremely, what's called a curated race schedule, where I don't think he's ever beaten Tadej Pogačar or Jonas Vingegaard in a stage race where they have finished, let's say, post 2020. I don't think that's happened. And I think the Dauphiné and the Tour will show us that he's not at a level, not because of like any physical difference, but just it isn't as polished as a stage racer as those guys, or even Primož,
Yeah. With all of the crashes this year, and again, I'd like to see a database, one that I don't have, but maybe I'll start working on a GPT because I would love to feed some data in there and see if we actually have more crashes among like top 10 world tour riders than we have in the past. I am starting to wonder. I love what Pog does. I love that he's going after big races throughout the season. That's something he said on Geraint Thomas's podcast. I don't believe everything he said. Some of it was a smokescreen, of course, but he did say, hey, I'd get pretty bored if I did the same race schedule every year. And he also said, I'm not going to be racing when I'm in my like mid to late 30s. I believe him. I think he's going to take his money and run, and he wants to put up some historic records, and he wants to take massive record-setting wins, and that might be it. I do wonder, though, if we do see this heightened risk for top-level riders, especially those coming off the volcano, are we going to see people who target the Tour in the future go in more of a Lance era direction? Like, would it actually make sense and serve them and their sponsors more to have a more sheltered early season, roll into Tour de Suisse or Dauphiné, and then go straight into the Tour versus what we see riders do now, like the way we saw Jonas riding earlier in the season before the crash, for example, just seems like a high level of risk for a guy that's going to go win the Tour.
Wouldn't you say Remco's schedule this year has been pretty Lance-esque? But he
doesn't
race.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I don't see him as a rider with that level of talent.
Yeah. I do think that will go back. And those who don't know what we're talking about, Lance Armstrong basically would not race until the Dauphiné. There were years where he tried to win Liège, but the focus was on the Tour. I guess he did like Amstel Gold a few times. He could have crashed there. He always did an early season stage race. I also think in those days, those early season stage races were so relaxed that your chances of crashing were much lower. I do think someone will identify that as an inefficiency, but that is kind of what Jonas Vingegaard does, right? He has a few, like, he comes out, rolls out the old Ferrari in the spring, revs the engine, puts it back in the garage, and then it's all in for the Tour. And then that's probably why he's won the last 2 years. That's his competitive advantage, is he's not distracted by the sparkly little things like winning every awesome big race in the world like Tadej Pogačar is. I am curious about, speaking of taking your money and running, Chris Froome, let's say Froome today, you see him, he's often the last guy in the race, struggling to hold the wheel. He finished 70th today, 13 and a half minutes down. At the same time, Derek G finishing 4th on a really tough finish, 13 seconds behind Roglič, also doing well in the time trial, also winning stages. But there's like reports in L'Equipe that Froome is the team leader for the Tour de France. These have to be leaked by Chris Froome. This cannot be. No rational person would look at the current landscape of that team and say, you know who's leading our team at the Tour? Chris Froome. I would say no rational person would look at that team and say, you know who should race the Tour for this team? Chris Froome. Like, I'm convinced these are all Chris Froome originated stories, right? I don't even know. And there's, I guess, a subplot that him and Mike Woods were feuding last year, and Woods didn't want him in the Tour team. But it's also very possible Mike Woods just said, hey, he can't be in the Tour team because he's not good enough. We have to take a good team. That, I would guess, that's the origin of where that came from. And he might not even have anything personally against Chris Froome, just saying the facts. I mean, this situation actually is getting I would say it's getting kind of uncomfortable to even be witness to watch someone. I heard he's not actually making 5 million euros a year. That was dependent on a sponsor coming aboard that didn't. But let's say he's making a few million a year, just consistently putting up donuts and then telling us that it's his equipment or it's his position. It's very weird. I find it uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah. In case you're just tuning in, you're not familiar with who Chris Froome is or his palmarès. He's won 7 Grand Tours. He's won 4 Tour de France victories. He's won 1 Giro, and he's won the Vuelta twice. His last Grand Tour victory was in 2018. It was the Giro. And he's 39, which seems a bit long in the tooth. On the other hand, Geraint Thomas is 38. They're kind of cut from the same cloth from a training history point of view. And as a point of reference, Nairo Quintana is 34. Alberto Contador, just 41. I didn't know that. Maybe we'll see him back in the Tour this year.
I actually think that's a good analog for Pog. The guy, he did have a drop off later in his career, but he's never a domestique. Just, I'm not winning Grand Tours anymore. I'm out. I do think that's what Pogačar will be like. But it's weird about Froome and Thomas, as you say that. I watched all these races, but it's actually weird now to believe that Geraint Thomas was once Chris Froome's domestique. And people were like, will Geraint Thomas ever be a leader? Yeah. And then now, it's hard to imagine that.
Yeah, and I don't have the Ineos Tour de France team in front of me. They may not have selected the team yet. But is Bernal going to the Tour?
I'm pretty sure he is.
Man, yeah. I think we just to leap topics here because I don't know. Chris Froome, it's like a wormhole. It defies space and time. I'm not sure what's going on there. And it doesn't seem like he's primed for a big comeback at the Tour this year, even if he gets his old bike position back, which he's talked about before. But, when we think about the wrecks that we've seen at the Dauphiné and the potential second and third consequences for Visma Lisa bike at the Tour, wow, it's like a MASH unit in a war zone. What what are we going to see from Visma Lisa Bike? What impact, if any, is this going to have on their squad? A lot of talk still about, I mean, I'm all in on GC Wout. I don't care if Benji thinks that's bananas, but you've got GC Kuss, you've got Matteo. You have a lot of people in the injured reserve list. What's going to happen, Spencer?
Well, Matteo's looking good, but okay. I'm going to circle back on GC Wout in a second, but Matteo's looking good. Finished 5th today, 3rd in the GC. I'd say his goal probably this week is podium. If he podiums the Dauphiné, that's big. I would say win, but Roglič, I think, showed himself to be, he's unbeatable. In a race like this, with this level of competition, when he's that good, you're not beating him. But Matteo will probably be at least their co-GC leader. You would say Sepp Kuss. Do you know how far Sepp Kuss finished down today?
No idea.
11 and a half minutes down.
This warmed up.
Highlights an oddity of Sepp Kuss, where he is so bad in one-week races, specifically when he's slated to lead the team in them. His actually, do you know his best result? And I'd say I call them the top 7. There's 7 one-week stage races worthy to be. I and like cycling in general deems to be worthy of like a tier 1. His best result is 10th overall at the 2020 Dauphiné. Wow. He's not a good one-week stage racer. So you might look at this and say, wow, Sepp Kuss off the pace. I don't know. I mean, I would have said the same thing going into the Vuelta last year. The guy just has an ability to, what do they call it? Turn the shit of one-week stage racing into or chicken shit of one-week stage racing into the chicken salad of the 3-week racing. So don't write him off yet. I do not think you can go in and go head-to-head with people with Sepp Kuss. He just doesn't have the raw power. He has to be played as a wild card, like an off-ball player, if you will. I guess they're taking Jonas. I mean, what's your take on that? He's at an altitude training camp right now. He probably will go right to the Tour if he's at an altitude camp right now. As we said last week, it starts on the first day is a mountain stage. There's like 5 classified climbs. That could be tough for him if he's not ready to go out of the gate. But at this point, they're probably going with Jonas. The question is, with all these domestiques crashing out, who's going to do the work? Because does this torpedo your GC Wout theory? That would be my concern, Andrew.
I'm just going to give you the Belgian.
But what's funny about this is I think Wout didn't want to do the Tour because he didn't want to do this Wout domestique thing. And now it's like the time's a flat circle. He's back.
Yeah, he absolutely doesn't want to show up and be Wout the domestique. And the big question here, of course, is what is the status and what is Pluga concealing at this point? And I have to say, Pluga looked deeply concerned in the post-race interviews following the crash yesterday. And he was asked about Jonas, and he gave the stock answer he's been giving, which is if his form is good enough, he's going to he'll ride to win at the Tour. That's the question mark. I, of course, think that Wout will be riding to win at the Tour. His form was not spectacular in his racing debut following the injury, but let's give the guy a little bit of, let's give him a little bit of leash. Like we saw him come back from that Tour de France time trial incident with the quad in the barrier, right? Like he's
open. I mean, and would you say was his racing subpar because his training? He's just focused on Tour training. That I would say it's a very real possibility.
Yeah, it's a real possibility. And then also sometimes we see riders actually benefit while they are recovering from major injuries. Just having like a bit of time off the bike that they typically wouldn't have sometimes can give them that super compensation and a higher level of form. So I'm sticking with GC Wout. I don't know who's, but I mean, like so many riders on that team have now had that taste of victory at the highest level. And then it's the question of, well, they're back in that Wout 2023, 2022 position where, they're going to want a little bit for themselves potentially. And what's going to happen when they're back in that domestique role?
I actually think stage 1, I'm looking at stage 1. I think it's going to be Van der Poel versus Wout versus Tadej for the first yellow jersey. And if Wout, let's say he finishes in that front group, he's going to go into the time trial in stage 7 high up in the GC. If he has a good time trial, then you're cooking with gas, Andrew. Then you're Wout GC Wout theory starts to have legs, and then obviously he has to make it through the Pyrenees and the Alps, but you could have a good couple days there. That could be pretty fun for you. I would say Richard Pluga is concerned because he's quickly running out of riders. I mean, what a bad luck season. I mean, they still do, like they could slot like Bart Lemon in there. I don't know if you know about Bart Lemon. I think it's a first-year World Tour rider. He was like a pilot, perhaps, like a fighter pilot.
Cool.
And then now he was racing Kermesses, and then he was on Human Powered Health for a year, and then now he's on Visma. Incredibly strong rider. So they have options to slot people in. They're not going to go empty-handed to the Tour de France, but I am curious to see how they handle this Jorgensen situation. Like, let's say he does have a good GC ride at the Dauphiné, and then you have Wout's ambitions, whether those be stage wins or GC. And then the Jonas question is clearly looming large because, I mean, we don't know anything. And I bet the situation's pretty unclear for them. You know, you can be putting in good numbers in training, but in the third week, what's going to happen? Is he going to miss that base that he doesn't have because he wasn't able to train for a large chunk of the spring?
Yeah. I'm just looking at the Tour parcours right now, and I have to say, I hate the race ending on an individual time trial. I don't enjoy watching them as a spectator. It is dramatic from just a time differential point of view, but it's just like, to me, it's the worst possible way to end a race.
Oh, I mean, do you like the sprint stage?
I do. I think it's kind of fun, Spencer. I like watching it.
I mean, I think the Paris stage is the best of them, and it is cool every time it happens. I like it. The only thing I don't like is it just kind of winds the race down early, and they don't do it as much anymore. Yeah. Stage 20 is usually of significance, but they used to like actually ride to Paris, and so it'd be like 2 or 3 stages of winding down. Right. I like that they're racing through the finish line. My only knock on this time trial, final TT, and it's a hard TT, by the way, is that their GC will probably be settled. Like, it would be cool if that was settling the GC. Like, imagine if the 2020 Tour, stage 20 was actually stage 21. That would have been epic, but I think the GC will be settled. And, you know, I don't know if you remember, there was like a Marseille time trial, stage 20, something like 2017, and Froome just dominated everybody. And extended his lead. I kind of worry we're going to see that, but not with Chris Froome.
Yeah. If you had to pick the stage that Cavendish might win, what stage would you pick?
Oh, man. Well, that's like the thing about the Cavendish magic is you can never see it coming. And it won't be early. It won't be stage 3, which is the first sprint stage. It won't be stage 5. Could it be stage 6, which I'll be at? So that would be fun.
I'm going with stage 8.
I almost think like stage 16, just like late, people are fatigued.
Right.
Cav comes to the front because he won't have the strongest lead out. That's the big.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have like the super watts, as we saw
this
Giro, like the rise of the super watts. So maybe later in the race helps him.
Oh, looking at stage 16, I'm going to go with Mate Mohoric for this one.
That is a classic third week breakaway.
Right, because we have looks like a fairly significant hill here, about 80K into the race, and I could see some separation happening there. And then we're rolling until about 25K before the finish. Might be difficult for that to stay away because sprinters teams will want it to bring it back together. And I could see Mohoric being out there.
I mean, if you look at the profile of stage 18 of the 2023 Tour, where that was a breakaway, Casper Askren one, it's kind of almost identical.
Yeah.
So that does support your theory. Well, I'll let you go. We've gone way long, but I'm glad we unpacked Unbound and the glory it deserved. And I'm excited for this final week in the Dauphiné. Just remember to wake up early if you want to watch it. I guess they do it so it doesn't conflict with the French Open, but it is a brutal start time, especially if you're not on the East Coast.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching the rest of this race as well. And I know we've gone deep on gravel today for all of the listeners out there. If there's a gravel race that you would like to see Spencer and me at in the fall, we would like to hear which one should it be. We could ride with you, potentially a live event. We've considered a few different races. We're not going to reveal them yet. Of course, last year it was BWR Kansas, which I think that our presence kind of shut down the race permanently. They can actually never top it. We do like to stick to regions with the worst possible wind conditions, ideally somewhat bleak, not a lot going on. That's where we like to ride.
Yeah, it's like bad weather, probably nothing going on. I kind of I'm Tour of Tucson curious. I know that's not a gravel race, but like 105 miles in the desert with a big group sounds fun.
Yeah, that sounded pretty good. I'm also thinking about what do I do to get out of Mid-Coast Maine during the winter as well. So that could be a good one.
Yeah. I apologize, everyone. I'm misremembering stage 20 of the 2017 Tour. The winner was not Chris Froome. He finished third on the stage, a second behind. There's 5 seconds behind Kwiatkowski, his teammate, who finished 1 second behind Bodnar on Bora, who won that stage. God, I biffed that, and he only wins that Tour by 54 seconds over Rigoberto Urán. This was clearly the writing was on the wall, Andrew, that this was the last Tour this man was going to win, but he did extend his lead on Urán. It was an extremely close race going into that. And then Urán never really had a chance. So I guess that's what I'm remembering as being anticlimactic. Like after the first K, you're like, all right, this is over. Urán can't do this. And that's why it seemed boring. But actually more exciting race than I remember.
How about that?
Sorry, Bodnar. Man, totally. I'm giving him the Chad Haga treatment. But we'll talk to you later, Andrew. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time. And we will talk. We have Tour de France Unchained coming out. So we'll try to get
Stay tuned.
some block recaps of those episodes as we watch them as soon as we can.